Meghann, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now. What is your reaction to seeing that verdict read out there in the courtroom?
It was a long time coming. I mean, this is over a year of testimony, and it really was captured right there in the emotion that we saw with the defendants and the attorneys. This was, their lives were on the line here. And I mean, it's always surprising when any verdict happens, but surprise might not be the right word in this case, because this case had so many problems in it. It just seemed like it was going to be tough for prosecutors to secure convictions across the board. And I mean, you're never sure that an acquittal across the board is happening, but especially for the first defendant, Deamonte Kendrick, there was a lot of thought that he could get acquitted on all counts, because his main charge was about a murder that happened in 2015, and it had been frankly just botched over the years through police investigations, prosecutions, and it really seemed like they were trying to tie this botched murder case from 2015 onto perhaps arguably a stronger murder case from 2022 that they still managed to botch. And it just, jurors weren't buying it. There was a lot of problems with this case, from the police investigation to the prosecution.
And Meghann, when we're talking about this case, it was the longest trial in Georgia history, criminal trial in Georgia history. Those jurors were there in the room every day of this trial trying to make a decision. You heard on the back end there, the judge also saying, I want to meet with you in a back room to thank you for your service and make some additional remarks. How much of a role did, again, just the length of this trial on those jurors play a role in this sentencing?
I think it played a huge one. And actually, just last month, we had a juror ask for the second time to be removed from the case. And he even said that he thought that he would be biased toward prosecutors moving forward because he was so frustrated with the length of the case and how they were presenting the case. He wasn't dismissed from the jury, and he actually ended up being the foreman of the jury. And he gave an interview this afternoon where he really talked about how this trial had dismantled his life. He's a flight attendant, and he wasn't, of course, able to work like he normally would. But then I also don't think it was the length of trial that really drove the acquittals here. I think it was the lack of evidence in the problems with the prosecutions. There's actually a couple jurors who are doing a pretty extensive interview on YouTube Live right now, because this is such a popular trial on social media. Two jurors are already spilling the beans, giving the tea on there, and they're going through a lot of problems with the case. And it's not just one thing here and there. It's just a lot of fundamental problems.
And Meghann, of course, you do hear jurors speak out after major landmark trials from time to time, of course, sharing their story and their thoughts. I hadn't even thought about, again, the lives of those jurors that were so interrupted during this time period as well. But I also want to go back to the young thug factor. We know that he accepted a plea deal about a month ago. Do you think that that also played a role at this point?
I do think it helped shorten the trial, but I'm not sure him leaving the trial is what drove an acquittal, because from what I've heard the jurors say is that they didn't see any evidence to support the charges against him either. I'm thinking it could have been, it would have been an acquittal on the most serious charges for him, and perhaps a conviction on some drug and gun possession charges, but perhaps not. But he definitely was looking at walking out of jail based on a jury verdict. However, hindsight is always 20/20, and the fact that having more defendants in the case probably would have lengthened the case. Prosecutors might have felt a need to put on more evidence. Closing arguments might have been longer. So it's really hard to say that we would have had the exact same verdict that we have now, but based on the juror interviews, it does not look good for prosecutors across the board.
And Meghann, we know that, again, just Shannon Stillwell, he was sentenced to time served, but again, the full sentence is 10 years. Why is it that he's able to walk out and go home today? Why did the judge make the decision to put 8 years for him on probation?
And she said under Georgia law, she was mandated to do the 10 years, but she also had discretion to commute it to time served. And she felt, she didn't really talk about why, but I think she made her opinion about the charges against him, or at least wanted to respect the jury's verdict. She made that known in her decision to let him walk out that day. However, they do have pending cases that they've caught while in custody that are still pending. They're not nearly as serious as the cases they were just acquitted on here. So, and their lawyers are hoping they'll get them resolved quick. But there are still some loose ends to tie up here.
And Meghann, before I let you go, I do want to read out this statement that we have from one of the lawyers of the defendants. They called the trial a waste of taxpayer money, saying with it over, he says lawmakers need to act to protect artists from having their lyrics used against them. Can a case like this, again, with all the national attention that it was getting, push lawmakers to do something in the case of, again, lyrics being used in the courtroom?
It could. We do. This case has gotten so much attention, and we've seen similar laws like that passed in California. I'm not sure what the appetite is at the Georgia legislature for something like this, but I think if anything is going to spur at least an examination of the possibility, it's a case like this.
And do we think that this might be the last that we see of these? Of course, you know, you said those two defendants still facing charges in other cases, but is this the last we're going to see of a YSL type case? Again, Georgia decided to bring RICO charges on what they considered a game. They weren't able to fully prove that in the courtroom.
It's not the last we've heard because there are still 11 defendants remaining, including some that are charged with the very murders that the two were acquitted of today. And prosecutors have not given an indication that they're going to abandon those charges. So there's another status conference scheduled for December 17th, but the judge was talking about perhaps another trial in February. So we're definitely looking at more trials for other YSL defendants.
Certainly a case that we've been following here on Live Now from Fox over the last few months. I want to show you again this tweet from you, Meghann. You put out there talking about the implication that this had on the lives of others during this trial, with it being the longest running criminal trial in Georgia history. Meghann, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. We always appreciate your expertise.
Thank you for having me.